Well, Josh Dale, welcome to the podcast, buddy. How's it going?
Good, man. Good. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm super pumped to have you on the podcast today because we've known each other for about 2 years now.
Yep.
My wife and I, we planted a church in a small rural town called Exeter, Ontario, and you were there the first Sunday that we launched.
Yeah.
And I saw you across the gymnasium that we were renting, and I was like, man, I got to talk to this
Yeah.
guy. And from there, we've played hockey together in men's leagues and stuff like that. And then we really began a friendship, and I got to know your story.
Yeah.
And your story was fascinating. And today, I'm just super pumped to have you today because your story is one. When I talk to people, they're like, "Man, have you talked to Josh Dale? Have you heard who he is as a human being?" And they're just amazed by who you are as a man and how you are continue to step into moments. And that's something that's big about you. People say like Josh Dale, he's got insecurities, he's got fears, but
Yeah.
he's a young man that is willing to go the extra distance to lift people up around him. And we're going to talk about adoption today. But you've got a lot. You've done a lot with your young life already. You've got a
Yeah.
bachelor's. You've got a bachelor's in addiction. No, a diploma in addiction counseling. You've got a bachelor's in religious education. You've worked with at-risk youth. You have done a lot with your life, and now you're back in school again. Why don't you kind of just give everyone listening kind of the background story of who Josh Dale is?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so yeah, I was adopted when I was 2, with my half brother Mike. So our mom had 4 kids with 4 different guys. 2 older sisters went to live with their dads. Mike went to live in a foster home, and then 2 years later, 2 years later, I was born,
Hmm.
um, and went to the same foster home. And from there, we were there about 2 years, and then a family from small town Ontario adopted us. And it's actually funny. So Mike and I, so um, I'm black, obviously, and Mike is Iranian, so he's a little darker as well. So when we were adopted into this small town Ontario, we made the paper. It's like, here's this adoption.
Man.
Yeah, this adding some diversity to small town Ontario. So it's kind of funny.
How many people were in the town that you were raised up
I
in?
think 3,200.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been around that number for quite a few years, but so quite
Wow.
small.
Yeah.
But yeah, then we grew up in small town Ontario, playing sports. Obviously, you know that I play hockey. Um, having many opportunities. Our parents were good at keeping us a balance in terms of working when, as soon as we were old enough to get a job, doing
Mhm.
chores. I grew up with 3 other siblings that were their biological kids. So a house of 7, in total.
Busy home.
Um, yeah. And then in that, Mike started going through issues when he was about 14, through drugs, and had some problem with the law, and kind of left home around 15 and all that kind of stuff. And I was set on kind of not following that path. So, I kind of stayed in the sports kind of side of things, and not that I was trying to make it anywhere, but I loved hockey, so I was kind of
Mhm.
focusing more on sports and all that kind of stuff until about I reached grade 12. So we ended up getting a call from Mike's lawyer, and he ended up coming home on house arrest, and that's when I kind of really started to bond with him again. Mike is, my half brother. He's kind of the only blood that I
Mhm.
know,
Yeah.
right? Um, so we started bonding, and I spent a lot of time with him, and through that, I ended up getting into some pretty hard drugs with him, and that kind of spun a spiral for the next 3 years of hard drugs, of leaving home, of not following family rules, of kind of relationship issues, getting fired a bunch of times, stealing
Mm.
money, to the point where I actually got to, at 17, I think it was like 12 days before my 18th birthday, I decided with a friend to rob a pizza store in town. And it was kind of just out of the blue thing. We were out of money, we needed drugs, and so
Mm.
eventually we're like, hey, let's rob this pizza store. Kind of laughed about it, and then like we're like, hey, let's rob this pizza store. Nothing went through my mind in terms of fear or remorse. I was just literally, I need money for drugs,
Mm.
and we're just going to do whatever we had to get it. So that happened. Long story short, we fought the law won. That old tune. So he got caught, you know, 2 weeks later, they picked me up. All this kind of stuff happened. I spent about a week in youth jail. Parents bailed me out. I came home and we were waiting for trial, go to trial. And I talked to my lawyer, basically said they got nothing on you, you'll be fine.
Mm.
Really, it's just hearsay. It's you got to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and there was plenty of reasonable doubt.
Mm.
So I just sat on house arrest, fighting with my mom, going to work with my dad, really toxic, getting people to deliver drugs at the house. And then I called my lawyer just to check up, like, hey, what's going on? And he said, hey, man, I'm doing a lot better than you. I said, why? He said, your buddy spilled the beans. He told us
Yeah.
everything. So long story short, I took a deal, spent 4 months in youth jail. When I came out, I spent another 6 months in house arrest. When that was done, I got right back into drugs. So
After house arrest, you got right back into
yeah,
the swing of things.
yeah. I went from so I got pretty big when I was in jail. I was about 170 pounds. Um,
For people listening, you're not a
I
big
know,
boy though.
no,
Like
but
you're
I mean more. I will
yeah.
say, like, for my height, and
Yes.
yeah, I was in good shape. Let's just say. Um, so then, yeah, in probably 3 months, I went from 170 to 123 pounds.
Wow.
So a good 50-pound loss. And then things just spiraled. I was at my worst. And then, I ended up getting punched out the one night. And so I went to my probation meeting, and she
Mm.
was, knew I got punched out and all this kind of stuff. So she said, dude, if you don't get your act together, I'm going to breach you and go back to jail. I didn't want that, but I didn't care. I still
Mm.
continued. Um, and around this time, uh, like I'm at worst. I'm getting threatened to be breached. Uh, and at this point, I think I was still in house arrest, actually. So yeah, house arrest hadn't finished. I had that 6 months house arrest
Mm.
after jail, and I think it was still in this period. And so I couldn't leave the house without mom, or dad. So I never really left the house because I didn't really want to go where they were going.
Mm.
We got a decent home, and we got grandkids and stuff. So basically, a lot of action happens around home. So I didn't leave much. So mom actually one morning said, "Do you want to go to a yard sale?" Because we used to go yard sailing when I was a kid, like garage sale, whatever you want to call it. So then I was like, "Yeah, I'll go." So we go, and it's being held at the United Church in Clinton, but it's not the church that's holding it. I think they just rented out their space, to whoever. So we're in there. Again, I'm still on drugs. I'm 120 pounds. I'm exhausted. I have no ambition. I got nothing. So I'm after like
Mm.
3 minutes. I'm like, yeah, I'm ready to go, but I can't leave without her.
Mm.
So what happened is I was getting ready to like turn and go outside and whatever and wait for her. And actually, something inside of me said, go and get this plaque. And it was, I don't know, maybe 10 feet in front of me. And so I was like, okay, I'll go get it. I didn't, yeah. And I went and got it. And it was this plaque, this glass plaque that had the words on it: for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you hope in the
Mm.
future. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh my goodness. Because at that moment, I had no hope, I had no future. So those two words really stuck out to me. And I was like, maybe there is something to this God thing, which I wanted nothing to do with God before.
Mhm.
And then I ended up getting caught by the cops for a breach of non-association, and going through court stuff with that, and you know, getting sent to adult jail. So I was in adult jail for about a week, and we made a deal with my lawyer that I would, you know, I'd finally go to rehab
Mhm.
instead of spending time in adult jail. I would do my sentence in rehab. So uh, I was supposed to go to rehab mid-July. I forget of what year, 2012, 2011, around there. And it was early July or early June.
Mhm.
Supposed to go, I think, late June. Late June. It was early June, and I had just called my dealer to come and bring me drugs that day. And with rehab,
Mm.
if you aren't clean when you go there, you get kicked out. And if I would have got kicked out, I would have went back to adult jail. So they make sure you detox before, so then you can focus on
Wow.
rehab and not focus on detoxing there. Just
Mhm.
disrupts everything. So I had just got my dealer to bring me stuff, and the phone rang, and it was, "Hey, Josh, to the rehab. We want you to come in today because we have a bed for you." And I said, "Oh no, I don't have a ride." Hung up. Well, this is around the time where people still use portable phones, and we had like three of them in the house, and mom always took one out when she went gardening. So the phone rang again. I didn't bother picking it up. Well, the rehab must have not believed me, called back, got my mom on the phone, and she's like, "Oh no, we can bring Josh today." And I was like, Mom came in, we fought. I said, "I want to say bye to everyone." It was an excuse because I
Yeah.
wanted the dealer to come and do drugs and not have to wait a week, you know, or
Mhm.
I didn't want
Mhm.
to get kicked out. Anyways, I didn't think about it. Drugs kind of ran everything. So as soon as my dealer came, I got the drugs, I did them, and I said, you know, I'll take my chances. And so I packed up my stuff. My parents are driving me, and we go to this place to eat. And after eating, I went outside to have a cigarette, and I was sitting on the curb, and I thought, God, please don't let them drug test me. I don't want to go back to adult jail. Sucks. um, and I don't know why I prayed to God, right? Like I
Yeah.
wanted nothing to really do with them,
Mm.
and so when I get to the rehab, they show my parents around, they show me around, and
Mhm.
they're like, "Josh, do you feel comfortable, Pat, that you'll pass the drug test, that we could send your parents home and they won't have to come pick you up?" And I lied. I said, "Yeah." And we get in there, and they never drug tested me. And I had talked to friends, and they're like, "Bro, I don't know how they drug test everyone." I talked to everyone else that was there. They drug tested everyone. So I was like, okay,
Yeah.
there's got to be something here. And then the place, it was a beautiful home. It's like a Victorian home, and then they had a section built
Mhm.
on for girls. But it was like a beautiful Victorian home, and three floors. And so I stayed on the one floor. And it was the only floor, only, I think, place in the whole rehab that had its own prayer room. And I thought that was interesting. So I was miserable for about the first week that I was there. And then for some reason, I decided, you know what, I'm gonna I'm gonna go in that prayer room.
Yeah.
And I had my first ever sit down talk with God that day. And I woke up the next morning, and there was an open house that was happening at the rehab and whatever. And things were different. I don't want to say, like, I don't want to be cheesy, but like I could hear, I could, and again, I at this point, I wanted nothing to do with God, remember?
Mhm.
So I'm not like trying to embellish this, but I could hear birds
Yeah.
more, like colors seemed to
Mhm.
be more vibrant. um, we had to wear name tags. And as I went up to get my name tag, the woman said, "Wow, look at the smile on you." And I thought, is she talking about me? Because I haven't smiled in years.
Wow.
And this was great. And so as rehab was ending, my dad and his friend, they drove their motorcycles down. And I was on the back of my dad's motorcycle on the way home, about 2 hour drive. And, um, you know, it was the longest ride of my life, because I thought, am I gonna
Mm.
go down? If I'm gonna, am I gonna go home and right away get drugs again, or am I gonna change
Uh.
things? So I go home. I decide, you know what, I'm gonna go to NA meetings and not do drugs again. So I go to these meetings. Long story short, they talk about God of higher power, and the meetings were great for me, such a staple in my recovery. But I
Mm.
recognized something was missing, and so I started going to church with my godmother, and I was pretty reluctant at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I had to spend more time on house arrest after rehab, so I could only leave if my mom gave me a note or I went with my mom. So
Yeah.
I started going to church to get out of the house, and then the music got me.
That's the spot, eh? Like
I know,
instead of
yeah,
going to the playground or something like
yeah,
that, you're like, yeah, I guess I can only go to church.
yeah. So the music got me, and I started feeling the music, and then I don't know what it was. I
Mm.
think God had just planted something deep in my stomach. It is this desire and love for Him, this reality that He
Wow.
is there, that whatever, and things just took off from that. Like
Mm-hmm.
I started giving my testimony at places. I started
Mm-hmm.
speaking at, youth groups, young adults groups. I spoke at a women's group. I spoke inside of a high school. I was a youth leader.
Wow.
I went to Christian concerts. I set up for a Christian concert. I would go to drive an hour for worship nights. I would do Bible studies. I would do street ministry. Uh, it was
Mm-hmm.
everything. I was in the zone. Around that time, I went to, like you mentioned, I went to school for addictions counseling. I
Mm.
wasn't even done my diploma yet. And I went for a job interview back home. I should have never got the job. Didn't even have a degree or anything. And in my mind, I said, God, why the heck did I drive back? That interview went terribly. And at the end of the interview, they said, so when do you want to start? And I was just like,
Wow.
oh my goodness, this is favor. So
Man.
from there, worked in the group home as a residential counselor, got a title of addictions counselor as well, did that,
Mm.
did my placement at Choices for Change. They're an addictions agency in the area. Check
Mm.
them out.
Yeah.
Um, um, and after that, one of the people said, Josh, you would make a great counselor actually at Choices for Change. Go to school and get your Bachelor of Social Work. So I said, oh yeah, absolutely. But I was very on fire for my faith. So I said, I want to go to a Christian university.
Yeah.
So I applied to Redeemer, got accepted. It was coming up on August. School starts in September. I'm driving in
Mm-hmm.
my car. God says, I think I want you to go into ministry.
Mm.
Don't go for your bachelor. I said, okay, whatever ministry means. I don't know how to even attempt that. So turns out there was a Bible college in Peterborough where I did my diploma. Just called them up. There was a program that fit perfect for me. I
Yeah.
went there first day, meet a couple guys. We ditched the supper that we're supposed to have there. Probably not a good thing on my first day. Uh, but because of that, and just I'll tell the story another time. Just at timing and everything, we ended up leading two African gentlemen to Christ, right on the street outside of Walmart.
Wow.
And it was like God in that moment tell me, "You're right where I want you to be."
Mm.
From then, I started going through this deep process with God. So much stuff. Things started to crumble, but God started to use that
Yeah.
to work on me. Kind of like your talk with David is God actually uses the suffering. He doesn't cause it, but He'll use it. And so
Mm-hmm.
God was using that in me. Um, Went into kind of a pastoring gig. Burnt out after a year. That was devastating for me because it's like this is what you
Yeah.
called me to. And then just spent time with God, and
Mm-hmm.
through that, He opened up a door to go to Tyndale University to do my master's my master's in divinity with a major clinical counseling. So
Mm-hmm.
I'd graduate as a psychotherapist. I got there. I've never felt more at home.
Yeah.
It's amazing. God has used it to deepen my faith as
Mm-hmm.
well, deepen my love for people, my desire to be empathetic towards people, which is
Mm-hmm.
often a humbling and tough experience. It really costs you
Yeah.
something,
True. Yeah.
and it takes a person who's willing to be humbled to be an empathetic person
Mm-hmm.
across the board, not just empathetic with people who look like you, but empathetic across the board. So
Yeah.
that's where I'm at. I'm loving life.
So
Things
good,
can still
dude.
be tough, But that's, you
Yeah.
just got a friggin' oh, sorry, you just got
It's all
a
good.
uh, life story from me there.
Yeah.
So
And dude, I think listening to your story, the people that are listening right now are probably like, wow, like I was, and I still am. I'm pretty captivated by, man, like you can go through a lot. You can go through a lot of suffering, trials, and choices that you choose, or kind of circumstances around you, and God can still use that.
mhm,
And that's where I want to kind of transition our conversation today, because right off the hop, the story your story began with, I was adopted at 2.
yeah,
um, and through this kind of story of who you are as Josh Dale, and this person that is becoming something beautiful, and having Christ formed inside of you through all of these incredible moments in your life, through school, friendships, family, all that kind of stuff, adoption is one of the biggest things for you.
yeah,
And I want to have a conversation around that, because through your story and allowing God to um, take your heart by a beautiful, beautiful reconciliation story, your heart has now transformed in ways where it's like, whoa, okay, my adoption had a lot more authority in my life, a lot more push in my life for some things to happen.
yeah,
And for someone that, like for myself, I'm not adopted. I was born into a family with mom and dad still together. Lucky, like in a world right now where family is more torn apart than anything. I just literally just finished studying for a message that I'm teaching on family, and the statistics of families are so damaging right now in our Western culture, I would say. So for you, thinking of adoption and God transitioning your heart and kind of shifting and like saying, okay, like let's use your story to impact more people,
yeah,
to show that there's beauty in it, but there's also, we've got to realize it, what it is. So can
yeah,
you kind of give me your idea on what adoption is and what it's been portrayed like, or maybe the stigma behind it or
yeah,
in it and around it?
yeah, absolutely. So it was about 2 years ago. I was driving down the road. I listened to this counseling podcast, and God said, "I want you to listen to this specific episode." And it was about adoption. And
Hmm.
my adoption was whatever. Yeah, I know I'm adopted, but I had a family
You
since I
made the
was
paper.
2. Yeah, yeah, I've had a family since I was 2, whatever.
Yeah.
But listening to this episode, what really struck me, I started crying. It was, I've never been able to say or hear someone say, "Josh, you look so much like your dad," or "You have your mom's eyes,"
Oh, wow.
or, "Oh yeah, you got your dad's sense of humor." I've never been able to hear that once. That people take that for granted all the time, right? Like, "Oh, you look so much like,
Hmm.
your dad," all that kind of stuff. And so I started crying, and through that, God did this amazing thing. I don't even want to say by coincidence. The next day, someone reached out to me. I hadn't talked to 5 years. Said they're
Hmm.
doing this thing on adoption. Gave me an article to read. I started crying. I said, "Dude, this is God timing. Do you know of a counselor?" So I started seeing an adoption counselor. Anyways, through all this, I
Hmm.
recognized there's a lot more to my adoption that has been shaping me. And as I began to hear the
Hmm.
voices of other adoptees and do this counseling, and there's resources online to hear the voice of adoptees, I recognize, one, they're telling my story. It's like they've been in here. Two, I'm not crazy.
Wow.
Wow, I'm not just crazy. And three, there's this collective voice of adoptees. It's not saying everyone's the same, but this collective voice of adoptees that have a different opinion on the
Hmm.
opinion of adoption that's sometimes portrayed, or oftentimes portrayed, in Western society, and maybe even more than just Western society. But basically, I call it the fairy tale narrative, is that
Yeah.
adoption is this fairy tale. At its basic level, you have a child who doesn't have a home and needs a
Hmm.
home. So you fulfill that, and it's like, this is a fairy tale. This is great. But it's not always that simple, right? There's so much surrounding adoption, and even my mind trying to
Hmm.
think of everything is swimming right now. But there's, just to kind of not get into everything. There's this stigma of, it's a fairy tale. Kid gets
Hmm.
in a home, it's great.
A family saving a child, like
Yeah,
it's like they're less
yeah,
fortunate.
yeah,
Let's take this kid in and
yeah,
give them a better
yeah,
life.
yeah. And so what happens is, you got this family that wanted to adopt, and they adopt, and now it's
Mm,
like the family they always wanted, fantasy family, perfect family, whatever. But
mhm,
the issue is with that adoptee. So so sometimes, and this is blatant, obviously why adoption would be difficult, is sometimes people come in, are adopted into a dysfunctional family, and then
mhm,
people would say, well, then of course adoption isn't a fairy tale in that way. But even when people are adopted into families that love them and are
mm,
trying for them, that adoptee um, still has issues. There's something called the primal wound, and it's this idea that the baby inside in the mom has built this bond that is unlike anything else.
yeah,
This bond in her body, sharing her fluid,
mm,
sharing everything. And then that baby is taken away from that mother, separated, and it creates this primal wound of attachment. And that actually attachment stuff can affect the child before the child can even utter the word attachment, before the child is, like, from day one. And so
mhm,
from there, you come into a loving home. And even though it's a loving home, that child still has so many
yeah,
issues. Then you start to unpack that attachment stuff. So the child is coming to you, and usually adoptions, for the most part, are closed adoption. I think more is starting to be open, but closed adoption means that there's no kind of information and no contact with the birth family. So this adoptee has just been cut off from their bloodline.
mm,
A lot of adoptees are, there's a lot of transracial adoptees, so they're cut off from their culture, they're cut off from their history. They don't know their medical history. They don't know any of that kind of stuff. They don't know if they have other siblings. They don't, there's so much identity and history and pieces of this person that's missing. So even though you grew up in a well-meaning, good, loving family, for that adoptee, he still struggles. Then
mm.
you have something, I'm sorry, I'm getting into it. Then you have something called the adoption fog. And so what this is, it's actually
Sorry, say that again. Adoption
called
fog?
coming out of the adoption fog. Yeah. So basically it's exactly what happened to me. I was 20. Oh, my stupid phone. I was about 27, or yeah, I think I was around 27. I'll be 29 this year, when all of a sudden I started realizing that there's more to this adoption thing that I ever realized. And so as I've been in contact with
Mm,
plenty of adoptee voices, this is a collective thing. You have people that are 60 thinking, not thinking of adoption, whatever. And then all of a sudden it hits them that this adoption has played much more, I call it adoption trauma, has played much more role in their life than they ever realized. And so you got people going through this at all ages. So you got this thing where, someone could say, yeah, my adoption is great. And all of a sudden at 35, they're recognizing why their marriage has been falling apart, why they haven't been able to get close to their wife, why they have maybe some reluctancy, thinking that they're going to be a good parent, and they go through
mm,
depression, anxiety through all that, or why they are people pleasers, or why they're in work, they're trying to, get perfection, and they're always feeling like they can't handle constructive criticism. They're always down. And so you recognize that adoption, and that being taken away from mom and then being placed in certain settings has
mm.
created this thing that actually carries into adulthood, and even not even just early adulthood, not even just mid adulthood, but even late adulthood. I'm talking to people that are 60 plus right now that are still dealing with adoption trauma, adoption issues from that. And so when we look at it this way, not even going to the fact that even in a lot of adoptions, a lot of international adoptions, there was a lot of, stealing of children, a lot of trafficking children.
Yeah.
And so you're getting a trafficked child without even knowing it.
My
You're getting
goodness.
people giving up their children in transactions for that so they can feed their family. You have abandoned children. Here in the West, there was a lot of corruption and manipulation around young mothers, not enough education, not enough support in the system, more focus on the child than rehabilitation of the mom or dad or even just support. So in that case, it was just take the child away, or the parents being manipulated to thinking that I'm just giving up my child for a little bit until I get better. And then when they got better and they
Mm.
went to get their child back, they said, "No, sorry, this is a closed adoption. You have no idea where we can't tell you where your child is." So that mom is sitting with that
Wow.
loss of losing that child through manipulation. So all of this together, you sum it up and you say, "Great, okay, I know people that adoption has gone well for, and that's great. But
Yeah.
if you listen to a collective voice, you have to see the side of
Mm.
adoption, that there's a massive side of adoption. And I don't even think it's a split coin. I think a lot about adoption until something changes is not a fairy tale.
Hmm.
It's not. And so for me, I grew up in a family that my dad owned a business. My mom was a nurse. We had a pool. We had a nice house that they built. I
It
got put
looked
through
like the
school.
fairy tale. It looked like the
Yeah,
fairy tale.
yeah. But here I am. I'm going through for school for psychotherapy. I'm 29 years old, and I'm dealing with. I just had a counseling appointment before you. I'm dealing with
Hmm.
attachment issues in my counseling appointment. And this
Hmm.
those carry over to even how my relationship has been with God. Him trying to teach me about His love and not being, maybe easy for some people. It's been a journey for me,
Hmm.
but not even just myself, hearing other people, other adoptive voices, which need to be elevated more in a collective sense.
Hmm.
All adoptees listen to their voices, and we recognize that it's not this fairy tale that we think of. But if that's never challenged, if we don't talk about adoption um, in deeper ways, if we don't highlight the adoptive voices, then we'll never know that side. We'll always think
Yes.
this is a fairy tale.
Yeah. So how in a world right now where um, there's a lot going on in our society, there's a lot of voices, there are a lot of concerns about how we're living in our Western culture.
Mhm.
How do like what are you seeing right now, I should say, of how do you see this moving forward where adoption can have some real good light shine
Yeah,
like brought to life actually,
yeah,
so the voices can be heard, so the people that are at home or that have been adopted or even thinking about adoption can really think, okay, it's not always the fairy tale.
yeah.
Like, how do we prepare people, how do we heal people in these moments?
Yeah, I did a paper on this, and one of the things that is the easiest thing that you can do, especially if you're thinking of adoption, especially a day seminar isn't going to cut it, or a 2 day seminar or whatever. This is a
Hmm.
child that comes with a whole other life, a whole other
Hmm.
um, identity that is now
Hmm.
coming into your family, and it might not go the fairy tale or fantasy way that you want it.
Hmm.
That child might not attach to you anyways. One of the greatest things that you can do is psychoeducation. It's reading,
Hmm.
and it's not focusing, because I've noticed a gap in a lot of adoption literature is that it talks
Hmm.
about just the adoptive parents, how to support the adoptive parents, how to
Hmm.
support the adoptive family, but but specifically read literature around the adoptee, right?
Hmm.
um, Nancy, I forget her name, she wrote the book The Primal Wound. Anyone thinking about adoption, read The Primal Wound. Go
Hmm.
buy it on Amazon,
Is it
please.
Nancy Pierce? Nancy Pierce?
No, I forget her name.
Oh,
I
okay.
forget. Yeah, I forget what
Yeah.
her name, but it's called The Primal Wound. There's more books that you can search on terms
Hmm.
of problems adoptees go through or issues that adoptees go through, and
Hmm.
as we read this, we get a better sense of what we need to advocate for. Read books from practitioners that are perhaps adoptees themselves, that are talking about what can happen within
Hmm.
society. So this is a very controversial statement for a lot of people, but where adoptees want to see this going is that adoption becomes last resort.
Oh,
And
wow. Okay.
adoption becomes last resort. So, oh, you ask, okay, what what is ahead of that? Well, it's what's called family preservation. So again, how can we get the systems and stuff to change where there's more prevention work to be there for young mothers
Mhm.
who feel that in that they're supported enough that they don't need to give their kid up,
Yeah.
or if the mom is going through stuff, how can we create this sense of being for that mom, recognizing she's a human being going through something. Can we have support for her where she's able to rehabilitate and come to that place where she says, I want to keep my child? That's family preservation. You also got a sense of of family preservation in a way where, as the mom is wanting to give the child up for adoption for whatever reason, that family blood takes this kid in, right? Instead of giving it up for adoption, blood takes this kid in.
Mm.
That's family preservation. It's not even a sense of adoption. Some people don't even recommend that you adopt them. You just take the child into your family. It's part of the family, still has the same last name, still the same birth certificate. Birth
Yeah.
certificate's not changed. They have all their history. They have all their stuff. They have contact with their birth
Wow.
mom and all that kind of stuff. And it's this idea of family preservation, because a lot of children actually, when they're adopted, they lose that sense of culture. They lose that sense of identity. And a big thing in attachment issues, and a big thing in being part of a community is mirroring. When that child comes into another family and that their skin color is not mirrored, their culture is not mirrored, there certain things about them are not mirrored, there's going to
Mhm.
be issues within that family. So we need to talk about what does it look like for society to move towards family preservation. So we get family preservation figured out, we get psychoeducation figured out, we get prevention work figured out. And again, it's not going to be perfect. This is a long journey, but it gets
Yeah.
us to the point where we are showing our hearts that we want adoption to be last resort. And I don't think that's a a a odd claim. I think, yes, we want family preservation. Studies
Mhm.
are out there show what it means to have contact with biological parents, and specifically your biological mom, and specifically being able to be mirrored within a family system, especially one that is blood related. Now, that's not easy for everyone to get outside of the
Mm.
topic of adoption. Blood doesn't just mean family, but there are statistics talking about this kind of thing for attachment. But where all this can happen, that's where adoption comes in. But
Mhm.
even then, there's still work to be done around that. That psychoeducation still comes into that person. Because I see people do this. I see people, I always wanted a big family, so we're gonna choose to adopt. I always wanted this. I can't this. I this. And it starts with the I statement and never with the adoptee. And
Oh,
that's been one of
wow.
my biggest issue, because the adoptee is the one that needs the focus, at least initially. And it always starts with the I statement. I mean, I'm not saying you neglect your
Hmm.
needs around that, but you really got to start this. This is not about you initially, because what happens with the adoptee is you got to ask yourself, can I care for this person and allow them a healthy upbringing and secure attachment to the point where they can be
Mm.
functioning. And because there's so many issues that surround that. Okay, what happens if the adoptee wants to connect with a biological mom? Can you handle that? What happens when the adoptee comes into your family and needs a bit more love and security
Mhm.
from you, physical touch, physical affection,
Mhm.
uh, but that's not your style? That's not your love language. That's not your style. Are you going to be comfortable doing that? If they need that and your other children didn't get that, are you willing to be like, I will give this to them and I will try to handle how this will make the other children feel? There's
Mm.
so much work that comes into bringing an adopted child in your family, because your whole family system
Yeah.
changes. Your whole family system changes. And what
Mhm.
what I found the issue was me, and I'm not trashing my adopted parents, but what happens is they adopted me into their family, into the Dale family, and they tried to just go along with life by making me a Dale. And I
Mhm.
recognize that there's part of me that's not a Dale. That's
Wow.
not a Dale. there's part of my personality, part of who I am, the way I think, the way I need to attach, the
Mm,
way that just my personality is, that's not a Dale. And that's the stuff that's missing, and because we're not psychoeducated about it, we're not educated about
mm,
this stuff. So as a parent, can you do all these things and to the point where you're not going to resent that child because it's too much
yeah.
work, to the point where you're not going to, you're going to think of this child as part of your own family, and you're so glad you did
Hmm.
this. And again, yeah,
Wow.
you're not going to resent this child, you're not going to rehome this child. That
Hmm.
happens.
Hmm.
Rehoming of a child as if they're a puppy because it's too hard for you, because it started with the I statement. Even this one's controversial. I can't have children. And we feel for that person. But somehow in that place, that person is elevated higher than the needs of the adoptee. So that adoptee becomes a
Mm.
fix. I'm sorry for saying this, becomes a fix for your
Haha.
infertility.
Mm.
Even though we wouldn't say that,
Hmm.
we can pull that out, that this adoptee is in a sense becoming a fix for your infertility. And I'm sorry for you moms who go through that. And I'm not saying you shouldn't adopt. I'm saying this
Hmm.
really needs to be thought about it. And it takes more than a 2-day thing or a little seminar.
Yeah.
My thing that I want to see implemented, and maybe through my degree and whatever I'll implement this, is adoption coaches. So through the first 2 years of your of you bringing the adopted child in your home, I would love to meet with you every so often. How's the
Wow.
transition going? How's the attachment going? Can we work through some of your fears? Can we go through some of this?
Yeah.
And
Wow.
every
Hmm.
so often. And then maybe every 2 years, maybe every 5 years after that. But we don't have that. It's okay, we get your profile, you go through this, we approve you, you pay your money, we might check in with you a couple times, and then that's it.
Mm.
And you expected this family. Raising a family is already hard enough. No parent knows exactly what they're doing when they start. Amazing, like you just you have Tatum, right? No parent
Yeah.
knows initially how this is going to go. Now think of
Hmm.
when you bring all this adoption piece into
Hmm.
that, it makes it all the more hard. So you have to be in a place of educating yourself about it. An adoption
Hmm.
coach would be perfect. Someone who's
Yeah.
an adoptee themselves that can help you through these things. And this stuff is missing. And
Dude,
it's a fairy tale that's just presented to us.
yeah. I was, one of my next questions was going to ask you was, what do you see that should change? And I think you just shine some really good light in this adoptee coach. I think you're onto something there, dude. And I'm hoping that people listening to this podcast hear that you're not trying to slam adoption. Your heart is literally that the transition and the motive and the purpose behind it all is full of health and beauty, not pain and anxiety. Those things will happen, like you said, like you can't stop some of those things. But like, imagine having someone walking through the process with a family that says, we're going to adopt, we're going to put our best foot forward as a family that's going to adopt someone in, but we're going to also invite someone that knows a lot of stuff that's going to actually speak into our life about what this, bring up the hard things. Like, it's same with
Yeah,
marriage counseling. People do marriage counseling, premarital counseling, like all of that kind of stuff. You ask people to speak into your life. Imagine someone speaking into a family's life saying, how's the adoption going?
yeah,
How is the attachment fear going? Like, what,
yeah,
like when it comes to the adoption fog that you were talking about earlier, like, get them prepared for that to help
yeah,
their new child understand coming in years before, like, hey, there's gonna be a process in your life that you're gonna have to go through, a transition, and it's called the adoption fog.
yeah,
We as a family are gonna walk through this with you.
yeah,
We want you to use your voice of how you're feeling, the emotions, the fear,
yeah,
the anxiety, maybe the joys, excitements of
yeah,
discovering something about yourself. And it's just incredible, dude. And I'm just so glad that a guy that's 29 years old almost, he's literally saying, this thing is beautiful, but it needs to be even more beautiful.
Mhm.
There's darkness in it, there's pain in it, but
Yeah.
how can we shine the light of God in these moments? And I really do believe it's in community. And I want to kind of transition our conversation there because a few months ago, um, we were talking about family a while back in a men's connect group that we were part of at Vital Point Church, a church that I pastor and that you attended for a bit until you moved to Toronto for schooling. You
Area.
still
Yeah.
attend Toronto area, sorry.
Yeah.
And you talked about your learnings of adoption into the family of God.
Yeah.
Can you share that? Because that was like our men's group was just like all
Yeah.
of our jaws were on the floor.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously by now it's no mystery that I am a Christian, and that I am an adoptee. And
Hmm.
one of the things I hate hearing.
It's a big word,
so,
hate, bro. That's a
so
big word.
I hate it. I hate it. So
Yeah.
please hear this, please,
Mhm.
please. Um, is when people say, "Oh, Josh, you're adopted. That's so great. That's like, adoption's in the Bible. Like, isn't that so great that you're adopted?" And why I
Mm,
hate it is because adoption has been very traumatic for me. It has brought up so
mhm,
much insecurities, anxieties, all this kind of stuff. And and as I speak with other adoptees, it isn't just that fairy tale. There's
mm,
so much darkness to it, and for the adoptee themselves, right? Maybe that
mhm,
even the adoptive family or siblings don't even recognize, but and the adoptee really internalizes a lot of things, and even without even being stuck with inside the fog, you might be 35
mhm,
and wondering why you can't keep a relationship, and so it just it the trauma is wild, and the
mhm,
effects of all this. And so I just thought of my life and all this stuff that being adopted has you know you know I took the negative aspect, because for however many years I saw the positive, but I've been really focusing on the negative, and I think that's a humbling experience. I
mm,
think as an adoptee, it needs to happen. It's there. You can't deny it. And I felt actually a burden off my shoulder when I started thinking about it. But as I started thinking all that negative stuff, I recognized this isn't like God's adoption. Stop comparing the two. Because around this time, strategically, when God told me to get into my adoption, and when I uncovered all that stuff, strategically right after that, he showed me what his adoption truly was.
mm.
And as he showed me that, I tried to find negative points about his adoption. I tried to find the darkness, and there wasn't any.
Wow.
God's adoption is infinitely greater than any earthly adoption. It truly is. Because even if that earthly adoption goes super well, there's still underlying issues. But God's adoption is perfect. And so here we understand that there's so much packed around it. Paul talks about God's adoption, of being adopted into God's family by the Holy Spirit, who sets his seal on us, that we're able to cry out, Abba, Father. We're able to be
Mhm,
part of this collective. We're able to, Jesus used words of, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. I won't leave you as orphans. I won't leave you alone. He talks about gathering us, bringing us in together. He talks about I and you and me, us and them. It talks
yeah.
about this beautiful bond. His ascension is this picture, and I don't know if people realize this about the ascension, but Jesus ascended with flesh on, and they talk about this being the symbol of Jesus bringing us into the relationship of Father, Son, Holy Spirit. He's our representation of that new humanity, which Paul talks about, the second Adam, which Paul talks about. And it's this idea, as ascension is this idea of bringing us into the family of God. And I
Mm,
recognize, as Jesus, had this as his backdrop, right? I'm gathering the people to bring them into my family, into relationship with Father, Son, Holy Spirit, to be transformed and to live out life eternally. I call this the dance. So he invites us into this dance, and that's kind of the motivations of what Jesus is doing. Establishes his kingdom, and this is part of what his kingdom is all about. And and who does Jesus come to with this message, right? Like he preaches in Luke. He has such a messianic kind of a cryptic thing. He's not totally saying I am the king to come, but he reads this messianic passage and he says, this has been fulfilled in your hearing. Basically saying, ta-da, I'm here. And then
Mm.
what does he do shortly after that? He goes to people who are marginalized and oppressed and not Jewish and who are Gentiles and all this kind of stuff. And he gives them this gospel, says, come and be part of this dance. Come and
Mhm.
join me in this family. And I took this in of seeing the people he came to. We read kingdom stories. He says, go out into the gutter and the alleys, and the best seat. I've saved the best seat for these people. We see it in the Beatitudes. It's this beautiful picture of God taking broken people and brokenness. Healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do. And we see
Mhm.
God take this brokenness and gather them all together that they may be with him in a place of love, in a
Mhm.
place of grace, in a place of forgiveness, in a place of transformation, in a place of belonging, right? And we see a diversity, and we see a God that takes care of us so much that he gives us his spirit. God gives us his spirit to draw us into that place. And so God's adoption includes all of this, that, hey, I'm bringing you into this family. I'm bringing you into Christ even. And what Christ has brought into you, what's ours is yours.
Mhm.
My home is your home. Mi casa su casa. This is what's mine is yours, and we're going to live this, not just because we sometimes do this thing of I'm saved by God, now I must serve him. And I always say to this, um, that and more, because you take in the meta narrative of Scripture and you recognize we're not just servants, we're family.
Yeah.
We're co-heirs. We're people who
Mhm.
are meant to walk in the cool of the day, in the garden with God.
Mhm.
This is what we get to do. And so God's adoption is bringing us into this place where we are truly his. He's there for us in the best way possible. He'll never leave us nor forsake us. He is positive attachment.
Mhm.
He is positive attachment.
It's the perfect inclusion that you
He
said.
is. Yes, I mentioned that before. It's the perfect inclusion.
Mhm.
And I didn't experience that in my earthly adoption. And many countless voices that I have listened to of adoptees, local and people. I talked to someone as far as California yesterday on the phone. Probably cost me a lot, but that's
It's
fine.
worth it.
They didn't experience all that I just mentioned in God's adoption.
Mhm.
So quit comparing them,
Yeah.
please.
Wow.
But don't ever stop offering someone God's adoption.
Wow.
Don't ever stop, because it is the perfect inclusion. It is the perfect attachment. It
Mhm.
is the perfect secure base.
Mhm. Well, Josh, I just got to say thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing your heart in this. And I truly sense and believe that you may be a voice and a person that God is shoulder tapping to show more people what it means to be adopted and how to bring beauty into it, not always just the fairy tale thinking, the
Yeah.
beauty of what it means to transition and help and care and guide a family and an adoptee into a family. But then also, what I love about who you are is you are an apprentice to Jesus, where you're trying to help people understand the perfect inclusion as well.
Yeah.
So, Josh, thanks so much today. If people want to get contact with you, can they reach out to you by any way?
Yeah.
Instagram?
Facebook, Josh Dale, or on Instagram, I think it's Joshua with two A's and then Dale.
Yeah.
Uh,
A lot
and
of
then
Joshua's out there,
yeah,
eh?
yeah, yeah. I got to do that. They wouldn't let me. It's like, oh no, this
Yeah.
username's been taken.
Yeah.
Um, or yeah, my phone number, whatever, 905-716-6724.
Mhm.
Don't prank call me, please.
No, but you are someone that would love to chat with people. So
Yeah,
we'll link
absolutely.
all that stuff into the show notes. And Josh, we're praying for you and we're on your side and can't wait to see what God does with your
Yeah.
life.
Thanks, bro. Thanks for having me.
See you later.